Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
I'm John Kennedy.
And Father Peter has begun his long-awaited sabbatical. So it's just the two of us. We're very excited to be with you. We're wishing Peter a great time wherever his road takes him. And we've been the last few weeks deep into Matthew's gospel, where we've been hearing Jesus's parables, comparing the kingdom of God to many, many agricultural images, the wheat and the weeds and things like that. So there's also a little healthy or unhealthy mix of heavy-handed language, like weeping and gnashing of teeth. So there's plenty of things to grapple with here. So glad you're back, John, and I think we'll have a little tangle with this one. It's pretty heavy, but fun. These are gems of wisdom. Jesus is nothing if not the most wonderful wisdom teacher of all time. So I'm excited to dig into these with you. So let's begin. This is the gospel for the 9th Sunday after Pentecost, and it's Matthew 13, 31 to 33, and 44 to 52. Jesus put before the crowds another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, yes. And Jesus said to them, therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, wow, we've got 5 parables here about the kingdom of heaven. One little quiz at the end.
That's right.
So where would you start with this, John?
I would start with how happy I am actually that this is my first podcast back after being away for a few weeks, because I really love this stuff. I love the parables. I love Jesus in this wisdom teacher mode, almost Zen master mode. The parables are not unlike Zen koans, which are these sayings that Zen masters would teach that are not meant to be understood analytically and logically or straightforwardly, but rather give way to an insight, an interior experience that results in a sort of, aha, I see now. You know, something has changed in the students or the hearers' inner landscape. Jesus is very much operating in this mode here. So I really love this stuff. In looking at commentary by Raymond Brown, the great New Testament scholar, he said that structurally, this section that we're in right now, the parables, is the center of Matthew's gospel. So I love that this is both central, not only for me and how I understand and learn from Jesus, but central to how Matthew saw Jesus. So I'm just excited to talk about what these I almost want to say what these mean, but I almost think that's not the point, because Jesus doesn't say the kingdom of heaven is a mustard seed or is yeast or is treasure hidden in a field. He says it is like. So this is sort of analogical language that we have to, puzzle out a little bit, and not suppose that we can really grasp the totality in these words or even in the ideas but rather see them as pointers to something that we really can't grasp and really can't put into words.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I feel like there's this common theme of hiddenness, or kind of like an unseen mystery that Jesus is really, going at many angles to express and to invite people's imagination to come into it. And you're right. I mean, they're not they're not straightforward and not meant to be. And I love that one is not enough. He gives many facets of many doorways into trying to grasp this mystery of the kingdom. So very cool. Well, should we start at the top and discuss if not the meaning, some of the richness that's contained in these? So kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. I would just say about this, if you want, I'll launch us into that one.
Yeah, please.
Of course, it's some commentators get very technical about how mustard seeds aren't actually the smallest seed or anything like that, and they don't grow into trees. But but obviously, the idea is that it's a seed that's very tiny and can become something magnificent and something useful. But the irony here, I think, is that a mustard bush is like a weed. And that in that period, or, in this time and geographical area, nobody would plant a mustard shrub because it was like a weed, Wow. So I love the idea. Somebody said that I read that Jesus, if Jesus is the mustard seed in this image, he's willing to come into the world as one that would be treated like a weed, and then surprise everyone at how life-giving and how surprising it is that what he does plant in the world can become something so flourishing and appear to be so irritating or so disruptive, and yet provide shade. And the image at the end of this paragraph is sunshine and birds and nests and shade and harmony, and all from what the world perceived to be a weed. That's one fresh take that I hadn't really heard before I started studying for today.
I don't think I'd heard that either. If I have, I've totally forgot about it. Then not only is the mustard seed small and unimpressive, but apparently the mustard seed is also, it grows into weeds, which nobody wants weeds, including Jesus in one of the parables that go alongside these, although we don't get it today, of the wheat and the tares, or the wheat and the weeds. Yeah. The weeds are bad there.
Yeah, Peter and I took that on last week. Yeah. And, that's right.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And to me, really speaks to how all throughout Matthew, Jesus is revolutionizing his religion. He is drawing on it. He is resonating with it. But he's also doing something quite new with it. Because this parable of the mustard seed is clearly echoing a couple of Old Testament passages, one from Ezekiel, one from Daniel. And the Ezekiel passage, which is from chapter 17, talks about God planting on the mountain height of Israel, planting Israel so that it may produce boughs and bear fruit and become a noble cedar. So a noble cedar tree, much more prestigious, you could say. Desired among trees and such growths than the mustard seed and its resultant shrub. But where Jesus is resonating with that passage here is where it goes on to say, under it every kind of bird will live, in the shade of its branches will nest winged creatures of every kind. Nice. Obviously, going along with Jesus saying that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Then in the book of Daniel, there's a vision. Daniel is a book of visions and dreams. And one is, I love this, a tree at the center of the earth. This is like very sort of primal, kind of Joseph Campbell, monomyth stuff. It seems like in every religion and great mythological tradition, there's like a central tree. Yes, the tree of life. Right. So here it is there, and its height was great. The tree grew great and strong. Its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it provided food for all. The animals of the field found shade under it. The birds of the air nested in its branches, and from it all living beings were fed. I wish I could just read that more slowly and dwell with the beauty of the poetry and the imagery, because it's really a striking passage, and obviously is able to be read as a reference to Jesus, right? Jesus is this central tree, crucified on a central tree, and so on. But clearly, again, being some sort of forerunner of Jesus' teaching here on the parable of the mustard seed. So Jesus is honoring his tradition. He is immersed in it. He is, marinated in it, and he is bringing it to fulfillment. That is clearly what he believes he is doing. But he's also doing something he kind of subverts it or turns it on its head in so many ways. Right. And one of these ways is, the whole sort of view from the bottom thing, right, that Jesus identifies with and comes as somebody who's not really wanted or really seen as very impressive or promising or powerful or able to deliver what so many of his people were hoping for by way of, sort of a political revolution that would change the political situation for his people. Right. Jesus is not coming in that mode. Right. So he's both, in keeping with it, but also doing something very unexpected and kind of, clearly undesirable, because the occasion for so much of Jesus' teaching in Matthew is the opposition he faces, certainly in this section.
Yeah.
So it's
that idea of scandal. He sort of scandalizes everyone by going for the powerless instead of the power moves. Yeah. And he's taking the position of the victim all the time, or the weed, or the chaff, or the one nobody wants, or the ones we think are bad, or something like that. Yeah, completely subversive. That's super helpful to bring in those Old Testament visions, which he's such an inheritor of those visions. So let's keep moving. Maybe at the end we can kind of recap some of this. But next we move on to yeast. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman takes and mixes in with 3 measures of flour. So apparently 3 measures is like a huge amount of flour, right?
I had no idea.
64 cups of flour, and at the end she's got like 120 pounds of dough. It's like no small loaf of bread. So it's again a really hyperbolic set of images here. But yeast, once it goes in, unlike a seed or something, you can't like go and get it out again, or you can't really identify where it is. It's completely permeating the substance, right? And it's this thing that goes in, and then you can't even watch it happen. It just sort of happens mysteriously, that it starts to create this carbon dioxide, and through heat, and it expands the dough into however many-fold size that it might have been. So that's a powerful image too in itself. And again, the way we have the seed kind of mysteriously growing into something huge, we've got this strange substance going in and completely transforming from within the entire mass. I read somewhere where the carbon dioxide, this is a real extrapolation, but this idea that it's breath, it's air, it's what we breathe out, and in some sense there's an idea that the breath of God is at work here in the yeast. I thought that was pretty cool to think about.
That's very consonant with the Holy Spirit and the breath of God, breathing forth creation and all of that. Wow. In my reading about this, one commentator suggested that these the parables of the mustard seed and the yeast, which largely seem to be saying the same sort of thing, starts small and even hidden, obscure, and becomes something quite great. And even, it's hard to think of a shrub or an unseemly amount of bread as magnificent, but something quite extraordinary and large. So the same sort of message there, but perhaps what's going on here is that Jesus is using an image first that would be familiar, generally speaking, to men of his time, agricultural planting and so on, and then an image that would generally be perhaps more familiar to women, that of baking, in this case baking bread. And so I thought that was interesting. I think it highlights, if we accept that for a moment, that Jesus
on a commercial scale,
right? Yes, that Jesus was thinking very broadly about who his audience was and who he wanted his audience to be. And this is one of several resonances that this section of Matthew has with something we don't talk about a lot, the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is a non-canonical gospel, as it's called. It's not really a message of good news in the way that the biblical gospels are.
Of course, sayings of Jesus.
Right. It's a sayings document.
Sayings.
And it's really interesting to read in tandem with the certainly the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because a lot of the sayings that we get attributed to Jesus in those biblical gospels are found either basically verbatim in Thomas or with some very interesting differences that sometimes are quite significant differences.
Yeah.
That's just a little twist that seems to entirely change the meaning. Despite the association of Thomas's gospel with Gnosticism and all the complications that come up with that, historical, theological, so on. I have a pretty big soft spot for Thomas as somebody who's very into Asian traditions, into Buddhism, Taoism, etc., or at least tries to be. And I really resonate with this presentation of Jesus as a wisdom teacher who says things sometimes that are quite easy to understand and sometimes things that are very, very difficult to understand. And that's how Jesus comes across largely in Thomas. And we certainly get glimpses of that throughout the narratives of these Gospels, obviously this section of Matthew in particular. But anyway, with this parable of the yeast, this bringing women into it is a bit more clear, although Gnosticism generally is not so good at that.
Yeah.
But make of that what you will. In Thomas, this is verse 96 of Thomas, or saying 96, and he says, "The kingdom of the Father is like a certain woman. She took a little leaven, concealed it in some dough, and made it into large loaves. Let him who has ears hear." So he's saying the kingdom is like this woman who's baking this bread, really bringing
Is it to the woman, not the yeast?
Yeah, he says it is like a certain woman.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's a big difference.
It is a pretty big difference.
It could be, yeah.
And so not only do we get that, but we have this bringing something a bit more, that you said a bit more explicitly into focus here, that the leaven is concealed in the dough. It's something that's hidden that we can't see happening.
Right.
That's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, I think that's a really significant theme throughout Matthew. I mean, and also in Luke and wherever Jesus is saying that, he's concealed the wisdom from the wise and given it to the lowly of heart and things like that. And, these hidden things it's what can't be just seen with the naked eye. And it, to me, names mystery and some active, unseen activity that's flourishing where we can't perceive it. And all of these parables, including the one last week from the sower and also from the wheat and the tares, 2 weeks ago, and last week from the wheat and the weeds, is that, Jesus is always saying, don't be so sure which is which. The kingdom of heaven is permeating the world and gathering, as we move along, we'll get to the next couple of these, that what's hidden is the life-giving activity. And, our job is not necessarily to do anything except for look for it, witness it, talk about it, tell about it, but don't start leaping to some afterlife judgment day where we think we can have some agency in who's in and who's out. Like, that's not at all what the kingdom of heaven is like in any of these stories. Yeah. If anything, it's exactly not like that. It's gathering up everything into one, all the wheat and the chaff and all the things, and you can't really see how it's all going to shake out. Yeah. So wow, that's the hiddenness. I think that's a really interesting theme for people to contemplate and for us to really spend a lot of time on. Yeah. Can we move forward?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I could totally say more about that, but the hiddenness.
Summer,
but we can keep going with it because anything I wanted to say is connected to what follows. So
okay, I'm just trying to keep us moving a little bit for summer listeners. We could go on for hours on these amazing parables. But next we have this kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which someone found and hid, and then in his joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. So this time it's like the treasure hidden in a field.
Yeah.
Another hiding one. So would you like to launch us into that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're saying that the kingdom of heaven is spread out on the earth, which is, I think, another phrase that actually comes from Thomas. But I just want to highlight something that's totally implicit in that, and as well as you're saying that this is not about, principally anyway, about some afterlife scenario. This is about a dimension of reality, a perspective on reality that's available to us now, and is eternal, unchanging in some way. And part of how we come into contact with and know this reality, know this kingdom, is by tending to our inner lives. That Jesus is speaking, among other things, of the kingdom as an inward or inner reality. And it's a very subtle thing to tend to our souls and to our consciousness. It's very subtle. And so much so that many people, I don't know how many people, but go through their whole lives without any meaningful contact with it, and don't even know that they've missed it.
Yeah.
George Harrison spoke about his own spiritual awakening as it was like going through a door that he didn't know was there previously.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I think Jesus is talking about the kingdom.
That's a great image.
In that sort of way as well. This idea that it's something that we can so easily miss, but is everything, that is of greater value than everything else put together without it.
Yeah.
And that is worth giving up everything for in a very real way. But I found the hidden treasure one in Thomas. What I think is interesting about the Thomas one is that he says the man in this version had a hidden treasure in his field without knowing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just there. He doesn't know it. Then he dies and he leaves it to his son. And the son did not know about it. And then eventually it gets found. But we all have this treasure within, whether or not we know it.
Yeah.
And the question is whether we will find it or look for it. And another interesting thing is to think about who is the one searching and finding in these parables. I think it's both and, so just to give my position away. But one way to look at them is that the one who finds the treasure is us, like a human being, looking for God or looking for what is most ultimate in life, and same goes for the pearls. But another way to look at it is that God is the one searching for treasure, searching for a pearl of great value, and we are the treasure, we are the pearls, and God is looking for us. And I think we find in the spiritual life that it's really both and. That the one we are seeking is seeking us. Augustine says, the fact that we are seeking God means that God has already found us in some way.
And I think he or somebody said it's the one seeking God is God in us.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Or something like that. But I like that image too, that, God gives everything to be identified with us. And
Indeed.
James Allison talks about the pearl of great value, that this merchant ceases to be a merchant once he sells everything he has to buy this one pearl, and suddenly he's actually owned by the pearl.
Yeah.
He's not even a merchant anymore. He can't really buy and sell. But he's completely identified with this pearl, and he becomes the one to just show it off, in a positive way. That's that all in kind of demeanor. But that's fantastic. Thank you. And then we finally get this: the kingdom of heaven is like a net thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets and threw out the bad. So at the end of the age, the angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I mean, it's really important, I think, to point out the language here, that this word for net is really a dragnet, and this is the only instance of this word in the Greek. Sagene or something is the word, and it means dragnet. And there's no mention of fish in the Greek here at all. So a lot of the English translations put in fish of every kind, but the Greek simply says, and caught every kind. and meaning like flotsam and jetsam and beer bottles and boots and tires and fish and dead bodies and whatever, like brought it all ashore, And I think that's really important that somehow that got passed over. And regardless, I think the idea is it gets every kind of something, whether it's every kind of everything or every kind of fish. It's lots of different kinds. And, when the net's full, it's drawn ashore and they sit down, they slow down, put the good into the baskets and throw out the bad. But here again, I think that the emphasis can be on the fact that the kingdom of heaven is the net, dragging up everything into its net, and when Jesus says in different gospels, I will draw the whole world unto myself, all things, mineral, animal, human, the whole of creation, is permeated with this kingdom. And, this imagery about the end of the age, to me, the emphasis is at the end of the age. It's not in the here and now that we're supposed to be sorting the good and the bad, and it's not really up to us to sort out what's good and bad. And I really enjoyed reading something by Robert Farrar Capon. He's one of he's great. He died maybe 5 or 6 years ago at age 95 or so. He was an Episcopal priest, beautiful writer and theologian. And he talks about this as like, if the church is the sacrament of the kingdom of God, we're just this small example, like a specimen of what the kingdom is. And we're supposed to be like a mirror of this. So he says we're not supposed to be like sport fishermen with, exclusively using hand-tied flies and only trying to catch the beautiful speckled trout, but to be like the dragnet that takes in everybody and doesn't even sort it all out, but, wants to know who everyone is and rejoices that they're in the net, And I thought that was a really helpful image to me. And we lose at the end of the age, which is when Jesus puts all this in, or Matthew, but it's really not part of our work to be sorting.
No.
So that's what I've taken from that bit, but I'd love to hear what you say about it.
Yeah. Wow. I really love that we're supposed to just be a little sort of microcosm of the reality, the way of the kingdom. And that is primarily about opening our hearts and our doors to everybody, and it is not about going for what is most desirable or advantageous or prestigious in our world. I think such a challenge for certainly an institution like ours, the Episcopal Church, or really any institutionalized church, that it tends to follow. It tends to mirror not the kingdom of God, but the way of the world, which is to wish to associate with, those in positions of wealth or status, shiny objects.
Easy to get along with.
Yeah, easy to get along with. People you can have to your dinner parties. People that are good for for fundraising purposes, and that those people are not excluded, but neither is everybody else and everything else, right? Like all creation. And it's so interesting that a little teaching like this that has an element of judgment and of separation, both in both cases done by the divine, not by us, also has a message of really profound inclusivity. And I think that's one of these tensions in the gospel, in the message of Jesus, that, it's for everybody. The gates are open to all, but then in some other way, it's one of these paradoxes of the kingdom that not everything or every sort, it doesn't mean not everybody, but not every sort of thing, attitude, behavior, whatever, belongs. And so there is some reckoning to come, and perhaps, indeed, I believe that reckoning plays out on every level, from micro to macro, that primarily, like, let's say when we say the Psalms, and the Psalms are like, God, smite my enemies, properly understood, and the way that monks who chant these Psalms every day have been thinking about it for millennia now, is the enemies are within us, right? It's all that's in with us that resists the activity and the love and reality of God.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well
so as Jesus says here, so many treasures in these words that we could dwell on for quite a long time, but hopefully these have planted some seeds in us, and God willing, with you as well. So that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for all that context too from Thomas and in the Old Testament. It's very rich.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah. So wow, so much to think about. I highly recommend just going and reading on your own Matthew 13 and seeing what you think. And I'm the preacher this Sunday, so that'll be interesting. I have a lot to work with here. A shout out to all of our parishioners who so beautifully live as sacraments of the kingdom of God. I feel like people here want to know one another's names and celebrate their presence among one another. So I'm so grateful that I get to witness that as a priest here at St. Mark's. Grateful to all of you. So thanks for joining us. Please share this podcast and subscribe, share it with your friends, and we'll see you in church. God bless you. Bye.